we begin our journey into the searing, indifferent world of the stranger, or L'étranger, the essential novel by the French-Algerian philosopher and writer Albert Camus. This is the story of Meursault, a man who exists in a state of profound emotional and immoral neutrality, a man defined by the first famous lines of the book. The narrative opens with a casual, almost disembodied recognition of a profound human event, the death of a mother. Meursault simply states, "Maman died today," or yesterday maybe, I don't know. This opening line immediately establishes the central theme of the novel, the absurd. The absurd is the fundamental conflict between humanity's innate, desperate need for meaning, clarity and purpose, and the universe's silent, cold and eternal indifference. Meursault is the living embodiment of this indifference. He exists without illusion, refusing to ascribe meaning to events that he feels have none. His uncertainty about the exact day of his mother's death is not callousness. It is an honest expression of his genuine lack of emotional response to the event. For Meursault, the specific day matters only to the extent that it affects his physical schedule. This detachment is further emphasized by the setting of the event. His mother was living in an old person's home in Marengo, 80 kilometers outside Algiers. Meursault travels to the home, but his reaction to the long journey and the heat is far more vivid than his reaction to the body of the woman who birthed him. He is constantly aware of the sun, the journey, and his physical discomfort. The immediate details he observes upon arriving are purely sensory and external. He focuses on the atmosphere of the home, the nurse's statement about the quickness of death, and the superintendent's attempts at social propriety. His first choice, upon being offered the chance to view his mother's body, is to decline. This choice is not a calculated insult. It is simply what he feels. His senses tell him the coffin, the corpse, and the formal ritual are unnecessary burdens. He is concerned only with the immediate reality of his body. He is tired, and he wants a cigarette and a cup of coffee. The juxtaposition of the profound human ritual of death with Meursault's banal physical needs, coffee and a cigarette, is Camus's way of immediately confronting the reader with the absurdity of conventional emotion. Meursault's truth is physical and present. The social expectation of grief is a required performance, which he refuses to give. He's already a stranger to the social world. The vigil held before the burial provides the first critical opportunity for society to scrutinize Meursault's emotional failure. He sits through the night beside his mother's coffin, in a brightly lit room with a group of old friends from the home. Meursault's only internal focus remains on his immediate bodily state. He notes the harsh electric light in the room, the heat and his growing discomfort. He has nothing to say to the weeping old men and women, nor do they speak much to him. The event is characterized by a sustained shared endurance. The one moment of human connection he attempts is immediately corrupted by his lack of pretense. When the nurse offers him coffee, he accepts. He smokes his cigarette. Later, the concierge is seen smoking with him. These are simple acts of human comfort, but performed beside his mother's body, they are later used as evidence of his moral emptiness. During the vigil, the old people watch him with a silent, intense curiosity. They are observing his failure to weep, his failure to pretend. Meursault, however, is simply observing them, focusing on their physical details. The women's silent rocking, the old men's laboured breathing, and the dogged persistence of their grief. He sees them as physical objects, and their weeping is to him just another reaction to a physical process. He notes the peculiar relationship between one of the old women and his mother, but he immediately falls asleep. His exhaustion overpowers the gravity of the occasion. When he wakes, his body is stiff and the old people are still there. The night ends, and the atmosphere shifts with the morning. The superintendent expresses concern, urging Meursault to remember how kind his mother was. Meursault agrees, but his internal thought is typical. I agreed, because it was true. He states things only because they are true, not because he wishes to participate in a shared emotional consensus. The funeral procession itself is another sensory ordeal. The immense, oppressive heat of the sun dominates the day. The doctor confirms Meursault's assessment of the day's intensity. I've never known anything like it. Meursault is preoccupied with the brutal reality of the sunlight, which causes him physical pain and makes the earth seem to steam. His only real reflection on his mother comes not from sentimental memory, but from recognizing her newfound freedom from the oppressive heat. He realizes that having lived her life in Algiers, she is now settled in a new definitive place, the earth, and that her death has somehow given her release from the climate that tortures him. His thoughts are not about loss, but about climate, physical comfort, and freedom from suffering. His final act in this chapter is to return home, ready to sleep, having forgotten the whole affair. The physical present has immediately eclipsed the emotional past. Meursault's return to Algiers after the funeral marks his immediate, almost brutal, recommitment to the physical present. The chapter opens with him waking up, utterly relieved that the ordeal of the journey, the vigil and the burial is behind him. He registers the single day lost from his routine and notes that he now has only 2 days left of his weekend. His first action is to seek out Marie Cardona, a former typist at his office, whom he finds physically attractive. This decision is made with the same casual indifference that marked his reaction to his mother's death. He runs into her at the public beach and their interaction is purely physical and sensual. He notes her physical attributes, the way she smiles and the ease of their communication. Their conversation is light, focusing on the immediate activities, swimming, sunbathing and the warmth of the day. There is no talk of his mother, no mention of the funeral. Marie asks him about his mother, and Meursault simply says, "Maman died," and then quickly changes the subject back to the present and the physical. The irony here is deliberate. The day following his mother's interment, the day society reserves for reflection and mourning, Meursault spends in physical pleasure. They attend a humorous film which makes him laugh. The emotional register of the day is entirely superficial and immediate, driven by bodily sensations rather than deep sentiment. This sensory existence is his way of being authentic. He is not performing a role for society, he is simply experiencing life as it comes, one moment after the next, without connecting them into a meaningful chain. He does not love Marie in any romantic, committed sense, but he desires her company and her body. When he wakes up with her the next morning, he feels a sense of satisfaction, a feeling that life is good, but his thoughts immediately turn to the necessity of returning to work. His emotional landscape is dominated by the sun, the sea, and physical fatigue. These natural forces are the only things that impose reality on him. The death of his mother, the prospect of a relationship, or the idea of an afterlife are all abstract concepts that hold no power over his immediate physical being. He is defined by the absolute immediacy of his senses. The subsequent days introduce us to the small circle of neighbours and acquaintances whose lives provide the background noise to Meursault's existence. These relationships serve to highlight Meursault's own moral passivity and refusal to judge. We are introduced to Salamano, an old man who lives across the landing from Meursault. Salamano owns a wretched, mangy dog with which he has a relationship defined by mutual abuse. The old man yells at the dog, and the dog cowers and whimpers. They are inseparable and miserable. Meursault observes this cruelty without emotion or judgment, seeing it merely as an established fact of existence. He finds the pair sad, but it doesn't prompt him to intervention or moral condemnation. The second and far more critical introduction is Raymond Sintez. Raymond is a local tough, a man who describes himself in the passive. He is supposed to be a pimp. He is a volatile, aggressive character who immediately involves Meursault in his affairs. Raymond has a grievance against his mistress, whom he believes has cheated on him, and he plans to humiliate and beat her. Raymond seeks Meursault's approval and active participation. He first asks Meursault to write a letter for him, a letter designed to lure the mistress back only so Raymond can exact revenge. Meursault agrees again, with total apathy. He sees no reason not to do it. He finds the task slightly tiresome, but it requires little effort and satisfies Raymond's request. By writing the letter, Meursault actively assists in an act of cruelty, yet he experiences no guilt or moral crisis. When Raymond asks him, "Don't you think she deserved it?" Meursault replies honestly, "I don't think so, but I don't care." This statement is the key to his philosophy. He refuses to apply human judgment or moral calculus to the indifferent universe. Later, when Raymond beats his mistress violently, Meursault again remains passive. He intervenes only when the violence threatens to spill over, but he refuses to testify against Raymond when the police arrive. This moral neutrality, this radical refusal to participate in the judgment of others, is what society later finds so terrifying about him. He's a man who exists in a world without values, governed only by immediate action and the pressures of the external environment. Meursault's detachment extends not only to human emotion and morality, but also to the core structures of social life, ambition and career advancement. The ordinary human compulsion to improve one's station, to strive for a meaningful future, is entirely alien to him. This lack of ambition is highlighted by a conversation he has with his boss. His boss offers him a position in Paris, a promotion that comes with more money and responsibility, a prospect that most people would seize as a validation of their worth and a path to a more meaningful life. Meursault reacts with his characteristic sincere indifference. He explains that the change of location and the added responsibility are of no great concern to him. He says that people never change their lives, they just shift their location, and the routine remains the same. He finds his current life perfectly acceptable, and the prospect of a promotion brings him no particular joy or excitement. His boss, naturally, is taken aback by this lack of conventional motivation. Meursault's attitude is interpreted as a sign of sloth or perhaps a subtle lack of respect, because he refuses to play the required game of social striving. Meursault merely thinks that since he has agreed to the change, the matter should be closed. That evening, Marie Cardona asks him the other major question of social commitment: marriage. She asks him directly if he loves her. Meursault replies honestly, stating that he does not think so. Yet when she asks if he would marry her, he replies that he would, if she wanted him to. His explanation for this commitment is entirely practical and detached. He feels that marriage, like any other major life choice, is ultimately unimportant. He sees the possibilities as essentially equivalent. Marrying Marie or not marrying Marie will lead to roughly the same outcome, and since Marie wants it, he agrees. Marie, though slightly disappointed by his cold honesty, accepts his lack of passionate commitment. She is momentarily sad that he is peculiar, but she does not press the issue. Through these two parallel episodes, the promotion and the proposal, Camus emphasizes that Meursault exists outside the framework of meaning that society imposes on future action. He sees all such paths as equally leading nowhere, and he refuses to attach any intrinsic value to career success or romantic devotion. His authenticity is not heroic. It is simply a reflection of the absurd nature of human striving against the backdrop of an indifferent universe. Part 6. The Heat, the Watch, and the Moment of Reckoning. The escalation of Raymond's petty feud with his mistress brings Meursault, Marie, and Raymond to a coastal resort for a Sunday outing. This section is dominated by the relentless, almost unbearable heat and glare of the sun, which, for Meursault, becomes a physical character and the dominant emotional force in the narrative. The heat is not merely weather, it is an oppressive sensory assault that influences Meursault's perceptions and ultimately dictates his actions. He notes the sticky feeling of the asphalt, the harsh metallic sheen of the sun on the water, and the immense pressure it exerts on his skull. After a tense earlier confrontation on the beach, where Raymond is cut by the Arab and his companions, the group retreats to the shelter of a rental bungalow. Meursault convinces Raymond to turn over the gun, preventing further violence for the moment. Meursault's motive is purely practical, to avoid police intervention and the inconvenience of the situation. He takes the gun, placing it in his pocket. However, Meursault cannot stay indoors. He is drawn out by the overpowering atmosphere and the need to escape the dullness and the heat of the interior space. He walks back toward the beach, seeking the shade and the cool of the small nearby spring. The heat is extreme, blurring his vision and making the air itself seem to shimmer. The sand is burning and the intense light gives him a pounding headache. When he reaches the spring, he finds the Arab lying there, alone, cooling himself in the shade. The Arab does not move. The confrontation is silent, driven not by human enmity but by the brute force of the climate. The tension is broken only when the Arab makes a small movement, causing the sun to flash off his body. Meursault, blinded and disoriented by the immense sunlight, feels the intense physical agony of the heat. The sun's glare becomes so sharp that it feels like a painful metallic pressure. In this state of sensory overload, where the boundaries between his internal pain and the external heat dissolve, he reaches into his pocket and grasps the gun. He fires once. The sound is immense, shattering the quiet of the beach, but it is the silence and the overwhelming weight of the heat that truly break his resistance. He does not stop there. He fires 4 more shots gratuitously into the already dead body. These subsequent shots are described as being fired into a silent indifference, knocking on the door of misfortune. The murder is completed, driven by the bendy, oppressive force of the sun rather than any recognizable human emotional motive. The murder of the Arab on the beach marks the end of the first sensory-driven section of The Stranger and the beginning of the second, which is defined by the society's attempt to impose meaning and causality upon Meursault's meaningless act. The police procedures that follow the murder are routine and surprisingly banal. Meursault is arrested, and he narrates his experience with the same emotional neutrality he applied to his mother's death. He feels no overwhelming guilt, nor does he express remorse. His primary feelings are of inconvenience and a quiet resignation to the external forces that now control his life. He is taken to the magistrate, the examining judge, for questioning. This confrontation is the first true clash between Meursault's authentic indifference and society's desperate need for logical order. The judge is not just interested in the facts of the crime. He is interested in the motive, the chain of causality, and the emotional context. The judge asks Meursault why he waited between the first shot and the subsequent 4. He tries to understand the logic behind this excessive violence. Meursault, incapable of lying or inventing a rational motive, can only offer the simple, honest, and terrifying truth. It was because of the son, and the judge, a man dedicated to the logic and morality of Christian faith, finds this explanation entirely insufficient and deeply disturbing. How can a man kill another human being because of a physical sensation like the sun's glare? This explanation defies the fundamental human need for psychological causation. The judge then attempts to draw Meursault into the Christian framework of sin, guilt, and repentance. He shows Meursault a crucifix, demanding to know if Meursault believes in God and if he repents his sin. Meursault, however, remains unmoved. He is polite but entirely honest. He does not believe in God, and he does not feel remorse in the conventional sense. He is sad about the inconvenience, but he does not believe the universe cares. This refusal to acknowledge sin or seek salvation marks Meursault as a dangerous anomaly. For the magistrate, Meursault's lack of remorse is proof not merely of crime but of moral corruption. The judge eventually gives up, labelling Meursault as Monsieur Antichrist and isolating him as a threat to the established order. Meursault is left with the quiet realization that his simple honesty, his refusal to lie about his feelings, is precisely what makes him unacceptable to the world. Meursault's transition to prison life is described with the same detached, sensory focus that defined his life outside. He quickly adapts to the physical constraints and the monotonous routine, accepting his lack of freedom with the same indifference he showed toward the murder. Initially, the loss of his physical freedom is the most difficult adjustment. He misses the sea, the feel of the sun on his skin, and the company of women, particularly Marie. However, he gradually finds a peculiar comfort in the predictability of the cell. He is alone with his thoughts, but his thoughts are not characterized by despair or deep reflection. They are characterized by memory and sensory reconstruction. He spends vast amounts of time simply recalling the contents of his small apartment, the arrangement of the furniture, the color of the walls, and the precise order of his possessions. By recalling these physical details, he manages to mentally reconstruct his life, proving to himself that his past existence, though restricted, was real. This exercise in memory replaces any need for future ambition or philosophical contemplation. He realizes that when one has nothing to do, the concept of time changes. The days begin to blur, and time becomes a single, continuous entity. This blurring of time is crucial to his understanding of the absurd. The future no longer matters because he has no power over it, and the past is reduced to a catalogue of sensory details. Marie visits him once, though they struggle to communicate through the noise and the grating of the bars. Their conversation is frustratingly superficial, and Meursault realizes that he can no longer truly connect with her. The separation is not just physical, it is a temporal separation, as he is living in a different state of time, defined by waiting. The physical reality of his prison cell forces him to accept the absurd condition with quiet resignation. He understands that he is trapped by fate, but he feels no need to rage against it. He reads an old newspaper clipping about a horrific crime, a man who murdered his family and then killed himself when they did not recognize him, but he dismisses it as a strange random event. He is content with the simple fact that he is still alive, and he finds that even a prison cell can be endured, proving that there is no ultimate meaning to freedom or confinement. He simply settles in to wait for the trial. The prison routine is finally broken by the start of the trial, an event that forces Meursault into a direct confrontation with the society that seeks to judge him. The trial, held under the intense Algerian summer sun, quickly reveals its true nature. Meursault is not primarily on trial for murder, he is on trial for his soul, for his lack of conventional feeling. The setting of the courtroom is described through Meursault's detached sensory lens. He notes the heat, the packed audience, the buzzing flies, and the bright light, all of which contribute to his sense of surreal detachment. The atmosphere is that of a spectacle, a theatrical performance where everyone, including the judge and the jury, is playing a predetermined role. The prosecution, the judge, and the witnesses all meticulously construct a narrative designed to prove that Meursault is a moral void, a man so alienated from human sentiment that his crime was premeditated by his spiritual emptiness. The first critical witnesses are those from the old person's home in Marengo. The director of the home and the concierge are questioned about Meursault's behaviour at his mother's vigil and funeral. Their testimony focuses not on the murder of the Arab, but on the details of his grief or lack thereof. They confirm that he did not cry, that he drank coffee, and that he smoked cigarettes beside the coffin. The director confirms Meursault's ignorance regarding his mother's age. The concierge, with a sense of moral outrage, explains how she witnessed Meursault's indifference firsthand. The prosecution draws the only possible social conclusion from these facts. A man who shows no grief for his mother is a man who is capable of any depravity. His actions at the funeral become the foundation of his supposed guilt. Meursault realizes with a sudden, chilling clarity that his past life is being dragged into the present and used against him. His lawyer attempts to minimize the damage, but Meursault himself feels an overwhelming sense of fatigue and detachment. He is being judged not for what he did, but for what he failed to feel. The court is demanding a confession of guilt that aligns with a social script, but Meursault can only offer the literal emotional truth of his existence, which society finds horrifying. The greatest psychological blow comes when the prosecutor triumphantly declares to the court, "I accuse the defendant of having buried his mother with a criminal heart." The murder itself is rendered secondary. The primary crime is his moral indifference. The focus of the trial shifts from the funeral to Meursault's personal relationships, with Marie Cardinal and Raymond Sintès being called to the stand. Their testimony is used by the prosecution to complete the picture of Meursault as a moral degenerate. Marie Cardinal is called to testify about their relationship. She honestly recounts that she and Meursault began their intimate relationship the day immediately following the funeral. She is compelled to admit that they spent the day swimming, laughing, and attending a comic movie. This information is devastatingly effective for the prosecution. Marie attempts to speak of Meursault's kindness and his affection for her, but the prosecutor swiftly cuts her off, highlighting only the chronology. The mother's death on Friday, the sexual relationship on Saturday. The timing is used to prove a complete lack of moral sensibility and a shocking detachment from filial piety. The prosecution suggests that Meursault's subsequent willingness to aid Raymond Sintès in a plan of cruelty further proves his moral vacuity. Raymond is called to the stand. He attempts to defend Meursault, emphasizing that he lent Meursault the gun and that the murder was an accident fueled by the sun and the fight. However, the prosecutor twists Raymond's statement, focusing instead on Meursault's passive complicity in Raymond's plan to abuse his mistress. The prosecutor hammers the point that Meursault wrote the cruel letter and refused to testify against Raymond for the assault. This shows that Meursault deliberately allied himself with a man of notorious immorality. Meursault's honest yet passive involvement in Raymond's life is portrayed not as simple detachment, but as conscious, willful evil. The two separate threads, the lack of grief for his mother and the alliance with the pimp, are woven together to establish a premeditation of the soul. At this point, Meursault feels an overwhelming urge to speak, to explain the true, simple sensory truth of his life. He wants to explain that his actions were dictated by the sun, the heat, and the immediate pressures of the moment, and not by any grand, malicious design. But he knows that no one in the courtroom would understand this radical sincerity. He is a stranger to their language of morality, and they are strangers to his world of pure sensation. He retreats into silence, accepting his isolation as the final necessary condition of his existence. The climax of the trial comes with the prosecutor's summation, which transforms the courtroom into a stage for a full-throated defense of social and theological order against the anarchy represented by Meursault. The prosecutor is not arguing for the death penalty based on the isolated act of murder. He is arguing for it based on Meursault's entire philosophy of life. The prosecutor begins by connecting the crime on the beach to the crime committed 3 days earlier, in Marengo, the crime of indifference to his mother's death. He masterfully weaves together the seemingly disparate events of Meursault's life, the coldness at the funeral, the immediate sexual liaison with Marie, the callous friendship with Raymond, and the refusal to repent, into a single chilling narrative of premeditated moral decay. He argues that Meursault is a man without a soul, a man who lives in a moral void. He states that Meursault's behaviour at the funeral was the first sign that Meursault had no place in a society governed by shared human values. By refusing to weep, Meursault had already committed a spiritual patricide. The murder of the Arab is presented not as an accident of the sun, but as the inevitable logical consequence of Meursault's underlying spiritual condition. The prosecutor presents a logical chain. If a man refuses to honour his mother, he will inevitably refuse to honour society and humanity itself. Meursault is a man who challenges the very foundations of the social contract. To further amplify the threat Meursault represents, the prosecutor invokes the spectre of a parricide, a man being tried in a nearby court for murdering his own father. The prosecutor claims that Meursault is morally equivalent to the parricide. He argues, "I accuse this man of having killed his mother in his heart." He suggests that the man who killed his father and Meursault are both monsters who must be eliminated not merely to punish them, but to preserve the moral integrity of the community. Meursault listens to this powerful fabricated narrative with a mixture of fatigue and detached fascination. He recognises the immense skill and artistry of the prosecutor in constructing a meaning and a coherent logic where none existed. The prosecutor is doing exactly what the absurd insists humans must do: invent meaning to cope with the universe's indifference. Meursault finds the performance convincing yet utterly false to his own experience. He remains, physically and emotionally, a stranger to the drama unfolding around him. Following the prosecutor's crushing summation, Meursault's defense lawyer, who has struggled throughout the trial to understand his client, attempts a desperate counter-argument. His defense is technically clumsy and philosophically weak, serving only to further highlight Meursault's fatal isolation. The lawyer, attempting to appeal to the human element, uses the first-person plural, we, when referring to Meursault's actions, implying a shared, universal human experience. He argues that Meursault is a good man, a hard-working employee, who has simply been overwhelmed by a fateful and tragic series of coincidences, compounded by the debilitating Algerian sun. He makes the critical mistake of attempting to explain Meursault's actions using traditional psychological causality and social pity. He focuses on the small kindnesses Meursault showed to Raymond and the emotional connection he had with Marie. The defense fails to grasp that the entire point of Meursault's existence is his refusal of these conventional categories. Meursault, listening to his own story twisted into a sentimental defense, feels a profound sense of alienation from his own life. The narrative presented by the lawyer is just as foreign and untrue as the narrative presented by the prosecutor. He realizes that everyone in the courtroom, the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, and even his own lawyer, is operating under a set of assumptions about motive and feeling that he simply does not share. The verdict is delivered with the sense of formal inevitability. Meursault is found guilty and sentenced to death by beheading in a public square in the name of the French people. The immediate reaction to the verdict is physical. Meursault feels the intense heat and hears the roar of the blood in his ears. He notes the quick exit of the crowd, eager to escape with the heat and return to their normal lives. The court has served its function. Order has been restored, and the stranger has been justly cast out. Meursault's final thought after the verdict is one of quiet, physical resignation. It was then that I realized that they were getting ready to start the next case. His life, his mother's death, and the murder of the Arab are all simply part of a routine administrative process. The cosmic machinery of the world turns on, indifferent to the fate of the man who merely tried to live honestly within its absurd silence. His focus shifts to the immediate finite time remaining to him. Following his conviction and death sentence, Meursault is returned to prison, where his confinement takes on a new, definitive meaning. His life is no longer about routine or memory reconstruction. It is about waiting for an inevitable fixed date. This realization heightens his sense of the absurd as he confronts the ultimate reality of his fate. His primary emotional response is, as always, physical. He is intensely bothered by the thought of the execution and the physical act of dying. He dwells on the mechanical details of the guillotine, the blade, and the historical reality of the death penalty. He finds the thought of being destroyed physically repulsive. His lawyer and later the chaplain attempt to focus his mind on the possibility of a commutation of his sentence, a reduction to life imprisonment, or a pardon. They try to instill a sense of hope for the future. Meursault, however, finds the concept of hope nearly impossible to grasp. Hope requires a belief in a future that is materially different from the present, a future that holds inherent value. Because he has already accepted that the universe is indifferent, and that his life has no greater meaning, he cannot genuinely believe in the prospect of a meaningful future freedom. He views hope as a false comfort, another illusion invented by men to avoid facing the certainty of their own annihilation. He notes the peculiar psychological trick the condemned play on themselves. They always cling to the certainty of a successful appeal, even when all logic suggests otherwise. Meursault sees this hope as a final act of self-deception. He prefers the absolute certainty of his death to the torment of false hope. His attention remains fixated on the immediacy of his situation. He observes the prison guards, the small changes in the light, and the way time is measured. He realizes the fundamental difference between his internal time and the time of the free world. His time is fixed and shrinking. The outside world's time is infinite and flowing. This period of waiting reinforces his authenticity. He refuses to pretend to believe in a higher power or a favorable legal outcome simply to ease his mind. He stands alone against the universal human temptation to soften the blow of death with comforting lies. His silent acceptance of his fixed fate is the final, pure expression of the absurd man. The long period of waiting is punctuated by the persistent, unwelcome visits of the chaplain, the spiritual representative of the established order. This figure embodies the societal and theological demand that Meursault find meaning, repentance, and solace in God before his death. The chaplain is driven by a genuine but aggressive desire to save Meursault's soul. He is shocked and distressed by Meursault's lack of religious conviction and his quiet acceptance of the void. He argues passionately that there must be an afterlife, a purpose, and a God who forgives. He tells Meursault that all men, even the most hardened criminals, eventually turn to God in their final hours. He urges Meursault to look at the cross, to acknowledge his sin, and to submit to the promise of eternal life. Meursault listens to these pleas with his characteristic sincere detachment. He does not argue the chaplain's point. He simply states his own honest lack of belief. He sees no evidence for God and finds the idea of an afterlife meaningless in the face of the certain end of his physical being. He is entirely focused on the immediacy of his reality, the prison walls, the passing time, and the mechanical certainty of his execution. The chaplain, increasingly frustrated by the Meursault's cool refusal, demands to know if Meursault really wants to live life like a stone, devoid of spiritual life and hope. He insists that Meursault must at least acknowledge the absurdity of his own existence and try to transcend it through faith. Meursault, however, sees faith as the ultimate act of philosophical suicide, a denial of the true, indifferent nature of the universe. By inventing God, one denies the pure, terrifying freedom that comes from knowing that nothing matters. The tension between the two reaches a breaking point. The chaplain, unable to bear the weight of Meursault's complete indifference, demands a final, decisive answer. The chaplain's persistent intrusion and his refusal to accept Meursault's simple lack of belief finally trigger the only moment of intense, external passion Meursault exhibits throughout his confinement, a violent, cathartic rage. The chaplain insists that Meursault must, at some point, doubt his own skepticism. He claims that Meursault's resistance is merely fear, and that Meursault must acknowledge the promise of something greater than his meaningless life. This is the final, ultimate attempt by society, represented by the priest, to impose meaning upon a man who has genuinely accepted the absurd. For Meursault, this is the final, suffocating demand that he lie to himself. Meursault explodes. He leaps up and seizes the chaplain, shouting at him, pouring out all the suppressed honesty and realization that has been building up since the first day of his trial. He rails against the chaplain's illusions, against the hypocrisy of a world that pretends to have order and comfort. He screams that the chaplain's life is meaningless, just as his own is. He asserts that the certainty of the chaplain's God is no more real than the certainty of his own death. He declares that the chaplain's privilege, his comfortable, ordered existence, is built on lies and self-deception. Meursault forces the chaplain to confront the one truth Meursault has lived by, the immense, cold, indifferent silence of the universe. He shouts that nothing matters, neither his mother's death nor his crime nor the chaplain's promises of salvation. The only thing that is real is the present moment and the certainty of his own inevitable physical destruction. In this moment of violent passion, Meursault achieves a profound clarity. He rejects all comfort, all hope, and all external authority. He embraces his life's condition completely. He has refused the philosophical suicide of faith and has chosen instead to accept the absurd with open eyes and a full heart. This rage is not despair, it is a moment of fierce, authentic liberation. The guards pull him away, but the philosophical battle is won. The chaplain, shattered and defeated by the pure force of Meursault's sincere rejection, leaves the cell. After the chaplain leaves, Meursault sinks back into his bed, exhausted but profoundly peaceful. The outburst of rage, rather than leaving him shaken, has cleared the moral air. He recognizes that through his violent honesty, he has finally shed the last remnants of false hope and illusion. He reflects on the night sky visible through the small opening of his cell, thinking about the vastness and the stars. He acknowledges the immense, eternal indifference of the world he is about to leave. He sees the stars not as symbols of a divine order, but as physical entities that exist without regard for human concerns. This realization is no longer terrifying or depressing. It is tender. The world's indifference mirrors his own, creating a strange, final connection between himself and the external cosmos. He realizes that his life, though meaningless by social standards, has been lived with a pure physical authenticity. He was always honest, he refused to lie about what he felt. He accepts the certainty of his execution, seeing it as the final logical outcome of his life choices and the ultimate fulfillment of the absurd condition. The imminent destruction of his body is simply the last truth he must face. In his final moments of lucidity, he thinks of his mother. He believes she too lived her life according to a similar acceptance of reality in her final years, finding a quiet, simple comfort in the world's natural rhythm. He sees the possibility that she too finally found freedom by submitting to the tender indifference of the world. Meursault's final wish is a testament to his ultimate rebellion against society. He hopes that on the day of his execution there will be a large crowd of spectators and that they will greet him with cries of hate. This hate would signify that the social world has finally acknowledged him, not as a moral monster, but as a dangerous, absurd man, one who refused the comforting lie. Their hate is, paradoxically, his final affirmation, his ultimate connection to the human world he rejected. He dies, metaphorically, a stranger no more. By accepting the full weight of the universe's indifference, he has achieved a profound, liberated peace, becoming the hero of the absurd. The story of Meursault is fundamentally the literary expression of Albert Camus's core philosophy, the absurd. This concept is not merely a feeling of meaninglessness or despair. It is a precisely defined philosophical term. The absurd describes the inherent, irreducible divorce or clash between two entities. On one side stands humanity, with its innate, passionate and relentless need for meaning, coherence, and rational order. We demand answers for suffering, death, and existence itself. On the other side stands the universe, which offers nothing but an eternal, silent, and cold indifference. It has no care for our questions, our morality, or our existence. The absurd is born out of this irreconcilable confrontation. It is the realization that the world, in its true state, will never satisfy our human demand for meaning. Camus argues that confronting the absurd gives rise to two primary temptations, both of which are forms of evasion or escape. The first evasion is philosophical suicide, and this is the leap of faith, the turn toward a religion, doctrine, or an abstract system that posits a transcendental meaning, a god, an afterlife, or a historical destiny. By embracing faith, one denies the rational part of the absurd conflict, effectively dissolving the tension by accepting a lie. Meursault fiercely rejects this path, particularly in his confrontation with the chaplain. The second evasion is physical suicide. This is the decision to eliminate the human side of the conflict, the longing for meaning, by eliminating the self. Camus rejects this, arguing that suicide only destroys one half of the conflict and does not resolve the absurd, it merely ends the confrontation. The true hero of the absurd man, is one who refuses both evasions. He must maintain the tension, acknowledging the universe's indifference, while simultaneously recognizing the value of his own immediate life and his fierce if futile rebellion against meaninglessness. Meursault becomes this hero by choosing to live without the comforting lie of hope or God. His entire existence in the first part of the novel, the reliance on sensation, the refusal to weep, the honesty about his feelings, is an authentic preparation for accepting the absurd. He never demands meaning, so he is less traumatized when he finds none. He simply exists, truthfully, in the face of indifference. The character of Meursault can be seen as the embodiment of Camus's most famous philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, which was published alongside The Stranger in 1942. In the myth, Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to an eternity of meaningless labour. He must push a gigantic boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, repeating the futile effort forever. Camus sees Sisyphus as the ultimate absurd hero. His life is characterized by eternal meaningless repetition. Meursault's life, particularly in the first part, mirrors this Sisyphean condition. His work routine is meaningless. His relationships are based on transient physical satisfaction. And his entire existence is a series of interchangeable moments. Like Sisyphus, he finds no transcendent meaning in his labour or his actions. However, the heroism of Sisyphus, according to Camus, is found in the moment of conscious return. When Sisyphus walks back down the mountain to retrieve the fallen stone, he is conscious of the absurdity and futility of his task. In that precise moment, he recognizes that he is superior to his fate because he can think about it, acknowledging the meaninglessness without succumbing to it. Similarly, Meursault achieves his heroism not in the act of murder, but in his final confrontation with the chaplain and his subsequent acceptance of his fate. In prison, when he rejects all hope and embraces the tender indifference of the world, Meursault finds his lucidity. He consciously recognizes the absurdity of the social order that condemns him and the metaphysical indifference of the universe. By fully accepting his impending death, and by finding joy in the pure physical memory of the world, he conquers the meaninglessness imposed by his fate. His final wish for the crowd to greet him with cries of hate is his final moment of Sisyphean triumph. It is a demand that the world acknowledge his rebellion and his consciousness. He is the absurd hero, free from illusion and reconciled with his immediate final reality. He embodies the central imperative of the absurd, to rebel against nothingness by fully living in the here and now, even facing death. In The Stranger, the natural world, particularly the sun and the heat, is not a mere backdrop. It functions as a potent active force, almost a secondary character in the narrative. This focus on sensory reality is central to Meursault's Detachment and the philosophical framework of the absurd. Meursault's entire emotional register is dictated by climate. His boredom is often caused by the stifling heat. His comfort comes from the cool water and the fleeting moments of shade. His responses are physical before they are psychological. He is a man who acknowledges only the tangible and the immediate. This physical reality reaches its zenith during two critical events, his mother's funeral and the murder of the Arab. At the funeral, the overwhelming heat dominates his consciousness, making the process of mourning seem tedious and irrelevant. The immense physical discomfort he feels overshadows any expected grief. The heat becomes synonymous with the burden of living and the difficulty of performing social rituals. At the moment of the murder, the sun is portrayed as the direct agent of Meursault's actions. The intense glare, the headache, and the burning sensation on his skin are described as a physical assault. He fires the first shot to break the tension of the sun and the glare, seeing the action as a necessary physical release, not a planned murder. The 4 subsequent gratuitous shots are described as being fired into the silent indifference of the sun-drenched beach. This literary technique suggests that Meursault is not motivated by human malice or passion, the usual drivers of crime, but by an external irrational force of nature. By making the sun the causative agent, Camus underscores the absurdity of the event. The most profound human act, the taking of a life, is reduced to a physiological response to temperature and light. The power of the sun reflects the indifference of the universe. The cosmos, represented by the heat and the blinding light, is a brute, physical reality that dictates human fate without malice or meaning. Meursault's honesty lies in acknowledging these brute forces rather than inventing a noble or tragic human motive. He is ruled by the physical fabric of the world, not its moral one. Meursault's trial in the second half of the novel is essentially a devastating critique of social ritual and performance. The entire social structure is shown to rely not on truth or justice, but on the maintenance of a shared emotional consensus. Society demands that human life follow a script. One must grieve the dead, love one's mother, seek ambition, and repent one's sins. These are the rituals of meaning that human beings invent to stave off the terror of the absurd. Meursault's crime is not simply murder, it is his radical refusal to perform these rituals. The funeral. His refusal to weep, his smoking and his drinking coffee at the vigil are seen by the prosecution as the foundational evidence of his moral depravity. The court does not forgive his authenticity, his choice to be truthfully indifferent, because that honesty challenges the necessary illusion of social order. The relationship. His immediate sexual relationship with Mary Cardona is not judged as an act of lust, but as a deliberate violation of the temporal script of mourning. The timing is proof of his cold heart. The confession. His refusal to repent or lie about his belief in God is the final act of defiance. The chaplain and the magistrate are not just offering him comfort. They are demanding a submission to the shared metaphysical illusion that gives society its meaning. The trial becomes a theatre where the prosecutor acts as the champion of the established script. By connecting Meursault's lack of grief to his crime, the prosecutor transforms a random, meaningless act into a coherent, logical narrative of evil. This narrative is entirely fabricated but necessary for the court to maintain its authority. Meursault's greatest failure is his inability to lie. When asked about his motive, he gives the physical truth, the sun, which the court finds ridiculous because it lacks the required humanistic causality. Camus uses the trial to reveal that social justice is not about truth, it is about coherence. The system must find a meaning for the murder, even if that meaning has to be invented. Meursault, the man who lives without illusion, must be executed, not just for the sake of the victim, but for the sake of preserving the comforting lies upon which all society is built. The price of his truth is his life. The persistent presence of the Algerian climate in The Stranger suggests a world where human action is often a mere footnote to the deterministic power of nature. Meursault, unlike the other characters who filter the world through psychological and moral lenses, is a physical determinist. His life is governed by his body's immediate needs and reactions. The intense heat causes his headache, which leads to the murder. The loss of his mother is superseded by the fatigue of the journey and the intense glare of the sun. His desire for Marie is purely physical and immediate, a simple satisfaction of a bodily need. This emphasis on physicality over psyche is Camus's way of stripping away the layers of intellectual and the moral pretense that define conventional society. The traditional European novel focuses on internal conflict, motive, and emotional complexity. Camus shifts the focus to the brute, external forces that shape existence. The climate in this sense becomes a metaphor for the absurd universe. The sun is indifferent. It shines with the same brutal intensity whether a man is burying his mother or committing a murder. It does not judge, it merely heats. Meursault's response to this physical reality is authentic. He never lies about his sensory state. When he tells the magistrate it was because of the sun, he is speaking a profound, literal truth. He is confessing that his action was determined not by a human motive but by a cosmic, irrational force. Society, however, cannot accept this. Society must see a motive rooted in human passion, jealousy, hatred, or moral corruption. Because to admit that a man can kill due to a headache caused by the sun is to admit that meaning is arbitrary and fate is chaotic. By having Meursault focus solely on the physical world and his sensory relationship to it, Camus establishes him as a man outside the human contract. Meursault's authenticity is his tragic flaw, because it makes him incomprehensible to a world that relies on agreed-upon fictions of motive and morality. The man who is most honest about his physical existence is precisely the man society must eliminate. A crucial element of Meursault's personality, and a key philosophical argument of the novel, is his profound lack of a sense of consequence or future. His entire life is lived in the present moment, with each action existing in isolation, unconnected to a larger chain of meaning or ambition. This is evident in his reaction to major life choices, the job promotion. He views the promotion and the move to Paris as simply a change of scenery, not a change of life. He sees the future as just a continuation of the same meaningless routine: marriage. He agrees to marry Marie not out of love or commitment to a shared future, but because it didn't matter either way. The commitment holds no intrinsic value over the transient physical pleasure of the present. The letter to Raymond. He writes the letter aiding Raymond's cruel revenge simply because it was easier than not doing it. He does not consider the ethical or legal repercussions. Meursault's relationship to time is not that of a conventional person who builds a purposeful future upon the foundations of the past. For him, the past quickly dissolves into memory and sensation, and the future is an empty space devoid of purpose. In prison, this detachment to consequence becomes a survival mechanism. He adapts easily because he has always viewed life as a series of restrictions and necessities. He misses the sea and women, but he soon replaces them with the internal activity of sensory memory. He spends days simply recalling the precise order and arrangement of the objects in his old apartment. This internal focus on the physical past replaces any need for future hope or planning. This refusal to acknowledge consequence is the philosophical heart of the absurd man. If the universe offers no meaning, then all future choices are essentially equivalent, and all actions are equally futile. To live authentically in this framework is to reject the future as a source of meaning, and to accept the full terrifying weight of the immediate now. The lack of consequence in Meursault's actions is the very thing the trial seeks to invent. By demanding premeditation for the murder and moral causality for his life, the prosecutor is attempting to force Meursault's actions back into a coherent, meaningful chain. Meursault's execution is society's ultimate attempt to impose a final, meaningful consequence on a life that insisted on remaining meaningless. The interrogation conducted by the examining magistrate is the first official attempt by the forces of organized society to force Meursault out of his sensory reality and into the realm of spiritual meaning. The magistrate is a man defined by his adherence to faith and the belief in a transcendental order. The magistrate is deeply disturbed not by the act of murder itself, which he understands in legal terms, but by Meursault's lack of remorse and his inability to provide a rational psychological motive. The magistrate is desperate for Meursault to articulate a reason rooted in human emotion, such as jealousy, honour, or revenge. When Meursault offers his simple, honest truth, it was because of the son, the magistrate is horrified. This explanation is not only legally insufficient, it is metaphysically destabilizing. To accept the sun as the motive is to accept that the universe is arbitrary, and that human actions are driven by chaos, not conscience. The magistrate introduces the crucifix into the interrogation, physically attempting to bridge the gap between Meursault's earthbound, materialist reality and the magistrate's spiritual reality. He demands that Meursault acknowledge God, confess his sin, and find solace in repentance. For the magistrate, this repentance is the only way to restore meaning to Meursault's life and to the universe that produced him. Meursault, however, remains polite but firm in his absurdist refusal. He does not disrespect the magistrate's beliefs, but he simply states that he has no belief himself. He finds the idea of repentance and an afterlife meaningless. He is concerned only with the immediate reality of his impending trial and his confinement. The confrontation is a perfect illustration of the clash between faith and absurdity. The magistrate represents the human attempt to transcend the indifferent universe through invented meaning, while Meursault represents the commitment to lucidity, the clear-eyed acceptance of that indifference. Ultimately, the magistrate labels Meursault as Monsieur Antichrist, a verdict based not on Meursault's crime but on his philosophy of life. He is condemned because he refuses to participate in the necessary societal illusion of spiritual order. The magistrate, realizing he cannot save Meursault's soul, withdraws, leaving Meursault to the judicial machinery that will condemn his body. One of the most tragic and isolating aspects of Meursault's life, particularly during the trial, is his profound inability to lie. This radical honesty, which society normally praises as a virtue, becomes the direct cause of his downfall, exposing a fatal language barrier between him and the rest of humanity. Meursault's mind operates only on the level of literal truth and physical sensation. He cannot invent the necessary emotional subtext that lubricates social interaction. When asked if he loved his mother, he says he did, but he adds that he was too tired to know what he was feeling. When asked why he killed the Arab, he tells the court the purely physical truth, the sun. When asked by the chaplain to repent, he simply says he does not believe. Every time Meursault speaks the truth, society perceives a lie, or a monstrous moral failure. Society requires him to say, "I was consumed by grief," or "I hated the man," or "I repent my sins." These are the socially acceptable fictions that provide a coherent shared narrative. The prosecutor and the defense lawyer are masters of this social language. The prosecutor fabricates an entire narrative of premeditated moral evil from Meursault's indifference. The defense lawyer in turn attempts to fabricate a sentimental narrative of tragic human error. Both are performing a necessary societal function, creating meaning and causality, but Meursault, the object of their performance, cannot participate. He realizes during the trial that everyone in the courtroom is speaking a language that he cannot truly understand or speak himself, the language of conventional morality and emotional pretense. He feels a desperate urge to interrupt the trial and explain the simple truth, that he acted under the physical duress of the sun and that he has no profound insight into the meaning of his life. But he remains silent, recognizing that his truth is fundamentally incommunicable. His sincerity sounds like deliberate, monstrous provocation to the world that surrounds him. Meursault is a man condemned not by his actions, but by his language of pure authenticity, which makes him a true stranger in his own time. In Camus's philosophy, the term philosophical suicide refers to the act of rejecting one half of the absurd confrontation, the inherent tension between the human demand for meaning and the universe's indifference, by sacrificing one's lucidity and accepting an invented meaning. The chaplain, the magistrate, and the entire judicial system attempt to pressure Meursault into committing this philosophical suicide. Their demand that he repent and embrace God is a demand that he deny the silent indifference of the universe and accept a prefabricated, transcendental meaning. They're asking him to substitute the terror of the truth for the comfort of the lie. To commit philosophical suicide is to engage in a leap of faith, to believe in something purely on the basis of hope and desire, without rational evidence. By accepting a divine purpose, one eliminates the feeling of the absurd, but one does so at the cost of intellectual honesty. Meursault understands this acutely. He views the chaplain's fervour and the magistrate's desperate search for repentance as symptomatic of a fundamental human weakness, the inability to endure the knowledge of one's own mortality and the ultimate meaninglessness of the cosmos. Meursault's refusal is an act of supreme rebellion and authenticity. He rejects the comfort of the absolute. He refuses to allow his final moments to be contaminated by a lie he does not believe. His life, having been lived by sensation and honesty, must end by the same principles. His final rage against the chaplain is his furious rejection of this philosophical escape route. He is fighting for the integrity of his own consciousness. He is fighting for the right to stare into the void without blinking or fabricating a comforting image to fill the emptiness. By refusing to commit philosophical suicide, Meursault achieves the highest state of the absurd man, the individual who maintains his lucidity in the face of his own annihilation. His choice is to die truthfully, rather than live or die comfortably through deception. Alongside the intellectual evasion of philosophical suicide, Camus posits the second evasion of the absurd, physical suicide. This is the choice to eliminate the human side of the conflict, the longing for meaning, by eliminating the self. While the temptation of physical suicide is implied throughout the novel, Meursault consistently chooses to live in the face of meaninglessness. Unlike the characters in many other existentialist works, Meursault is not characterized by despair or angst. Rather, he possesses a profound, simple joy in the immediate physical reality of life. Even when confined in the prison cell, facing the guillotine, he chooses to endure the time. He finds value in the simple sensory memories of his past life. The feel of the sea, the taste of a cigarette, the sight of his furniture, and the feel of Marie's hair. He replaces future hope with the cataloguing of the physical past, proving to himself that his existence, though fleeting, was real and valuable on its own terms. Camus argues that the true response to the absurd is not to escape it through death, but to rebel against it through consciousness. To commit physical suicide is to surrender to the meaninglessness. To live authentically, fully recognizing the meaninglessness, is to triumph over it. Meursault's physical endurance in the face of his death sentence is, therefore, a crucial act of absurd rebellion. He is not choosing death. Death is being imposed upon him by a society that cannot tolerate his truth. Up until the final moment, he chooses life, recognizing its precious, unique value precisely because it is finite and meaningless. His life becomes defined by his fidelity to the immediate and the tangible. He values the sun, the heat, and the body's simple satisfactions. This commitment to the physical present is his affirmation of life. He demonstrates that the absence of transcendent purpose does not necessitate despair, but can lead to a state of fierce, honest joy in the immediate final moment. He lives his life fully, right up until the point when society forcibly ends it, proving that his life was worth living even without meaning. The character of Marie Cardinal serves a specific function in Meursault's life and in the philosophical framework of The Stranger. She represents the immediate, physical, and transient possibility of human connection that is nonetheless subject to the limitations of the absurd. Meursault's connection with Marie is purely sensory and present-focused. He desires her company, finds her physically attractive, and enjoys the simple pleasure of their shared activities, swimming, laughing, and physical intimacy. Their relationship is initiated and sustained by the immediacy of their physical lives on the beach and in his apartment. The crucial point of their relationship is the lack of conventional emotion. When Marie asks him about love, Meursault honestly states that he does not think he loves her, but that he would marry her if she wished. He sees marriage not as a profound commitment of souls, but as a simple functional arrangement that holds no more or less intrinsic meaning than any other choice. Marie, who initially accepts his peculiarity, still operates within the standard social framework. She is momentarily sad when he cannot profess romantic love, and she is later horrified when the prosecution uses their relationship's timing, the day after his mother's death, to prove his moral depravity. When she visits him in prison, their conversation is strained and superficial. The physical barrier of the prison bars, combined with the temporal barrier, Meursault living in the fixed time of waiting, makes genuine connection impossible. Marie is desperately clinging to the hope of the future, discussing an appeal and a life together. Meursault, having rejected hope and accepted the absurd, can no longer truly connect with her belief in a meaningful future. Marie ultimately highlights the isolation of the absurd man. While Meursault can experience genuine physical pleasure and comfort from human contact, he cannot achieve the deep, shared, transcendent meaning that society demands of a relationship. She is a reminder that even the most immediate sensual joy is finite and subject to the cold indifference of the cosmos. The relationship between Meursault's neighbour, Salamano, and his elderly, diseased dog provides a subtle but poignant philosophical parallel to Meursault's own state of isolation and habit. Salamano and his dog are inseparable but perpetually miserable. The old man abuses the dog constantly, dragging him around, yelling at him, and cursing his existence. The dog, in turn, is perpetually mangy, terrified and defiant. Their relationship is characterized by mutual hatred and dependence. Meursault observes this cruelty with his usual detached indifference. He is saddened by it, recognizing the pathetic nature of the bond. But he feels no moral compulsion to intervene or judge. He sees their misery as a fact of existence, no more or less important than the heat or the ticking of the clock. However, the philosophical significance of the pair is revealed when the dog temporarily disappears. Salamano is suddenly thrown into complete turmoil. He is consumed by genuine distress and loss. The man who habitually cursed the dog cannot function without the creature he hated. This illustrates the power of habit and routine as a temporary defense against the absurd. Salamano had structured his entire life around the routine of abusing and caring for the dog. The dog's presence, miserable though it was, provided a fixed point of meaning, a ritual, that anchored Salamano's otherwise lonely existence. When that ritual is broken, the fundamental meaninglessness of his life rushes in, overwhelming him with genuine grief. Meursault contrasts with Salamano. Meursault's own life is equally routine, but he never confuses the routine itself with meaning. When his mother dies, the break in the routine is an inconvenience, but not a philosophical crisis. When he loses Marie and the sea in prison, he quickly replaces the external habit with the internal habit of sensory memory. He demonstrates that one can live within the absurd routine without falling into the deception that the routine itself constitutes meaning. Salamano represents the ordinary person who uses misery and habit to survive, while Meursault represents the man who has consciously chosen to stand outside of that necessity. The ultimate status achieved by Meursault in his final moments is that of the absurd hero. This concept is the culmination of Camus's philosophy, defining how a human being should rightly respond to the realization of the absurd. the fundamental conflict between their desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. The absurd hero must fulfill three primary requirements: consciousness, freedom, and rebellion. First, consciousness or lucidity is the active recognition of the absurd. This is achieved by a Meursault when he finally sheds all illusions and refuses the comforting lie of God and eternal meaning, particularly during his confrontation with the chaplain. He knows his fate is certain, and he understands that the universe does not care. He refuses to commit philosophical suicide by adopting a faith he does not hold. Second, freedom is the state gained once one realizes the meaninglessness of all future striving. If there is no God and no eternal purpose, then every choice, every action is equally meaningless, and therefore the individual is utterly free to choose any path. Meursault lives this freedom by prioritizing the immediate sensual reality of the present moment over social ambition or moral consequence. His final days are spent consciously relishing the time he has left, rather than mourning the future he has lost. Third, rebellion is the response to the absurd. This is not a physical revolt against the social order, which would be futile, but a metaphysical revolt against the condition of existence itself. The absurd hero's rebellion is to live fully and to maintain consciousness despite the knowledge of annihilation. By insisting on his honesty, by refusing to weep, and by embracing the tender indifference of the world, Meursault asserts the value of his individual conscious life against the universe's meaninglessness. His final wish for a crowd to greet him with cries of hate is the last pure act of rebellion. It is a demand that the world acknowledge his existence and his truth, rather than letting him dissolve into an insignificant legal execution. The hate confirms his separation and his triumph as an authentic being who refused to be normalized by society's convenient lies. Meursault's trial in the second half of The Stranger is the most direct and devastating critique of the concept of justice as practiced by society. Camus suggests that the court system is not interested in truth or justice in any metaphysical sense, but in maintaining the illusion of social order and predictability. The court's primary objective is to take a random, chaotic, and meaningless act, a murder driven by the sun and heat, and impose a coherent, meaningful, and punishable narrative upon it. The prosecutor's successful strategy is to entirely shift the focus from the physical crime, the shooting of the Arab, to the moral crime, Meursault's indifference at his mother's funeral. The prosecution skillfully argues that a man who fails to grieve his mother is fundamentally incapable of social morality, making the murder a logical consequence of his moral emptiness. This narrative is necessary because if the court were to accept Meursault's honest explanation, that he killed because of the sun, it would be an admission that human reason and moral codes are powerless against the chaotic forces of the universe. The court cannot allow this conclusion, as it would destroy the foundation of its own authority. Justice, in this light, is revealed to be a mere tool of social coherence. The ultimate irony is that Meursault is condemned not for the murder, but for his authenticity. He is condemned for being a stranger who refuses to lie, who refuses to participate in the necessary social rituals of grief and repentance. The court demands a motive that fits the human script of passion or malice, and when Meursault fails to deliver it, he is judged guilty of the worst crime of all, philosophical anarchy. Camus suggests that society, terrified of the absurd, will ruthlessly eliminate anyone who exposes the illusion upon which it is built. Meursault's execution is not an act of justice for the victim, but an act of social self-defense against the unsettling truth of the universe's indifference. Meursault's unique consciousness is best understood through his persistent reliance on sensory cataloguing. This is his primary mode of engagement with the world, a direct result of his rejection of abstract meaning. He lives entirely through his senses, which remain his only reliable source of truth. In the first part of the novel, his senses are the external forces that drive him. The heat, the light, the salty water, and the feel of Marie's body are the only things that truly matter. He experiences these with a purity that transcends moral or emotional judgment. When he is uncomfortable, as he is at the funeral or on the beach, his only goal is the removal of the physical discomfort. In the second part, particularly in prison, his sensory engagement shifts inward and becomes a survival mechanism. Cut off from the external world, he uses his senses to mentally reconstruct his past life. He spends hours deliberately recalling the physical details of his apartment, the location of the towel on the rack, the colour of his sheets, the precise order of his shirts in the closet. This meticulous mental activity is not a sign of madness, but a sustained philosophical effort to affirm the value of the concrete. By recalling these physical facts, Meursault proves to himself that his existence, his past, was real, palpable, and unique. He is essentially cataloguing the evidence of his own existence in defiance of the world that seeks to declare him morally void. This focus on the physical and the immediate is his shield against the terror of the abstract. While the chaplain and the magistrate demand that he contemplate abstract notions of God and sin, Meursault grounds himself in the tangible reality of his body and his memories. The moment of the murder itself is the ultimate sensory event. It is described as a pure physical reaction to light and heat, a moment when the external forces of nature violently overwhelmed his internal equilibrium. This reliance on sensation is the key to understanding his authenticity and why he remains, to the end, a creature of the earth rather than a creature of the spirit. The philosophical confrontation between Meursault and the world is sharply defined by their differing attitudes toward hope. For the ordinary man, hope, the belief in a better, more meaningful future, is the fuel necessary for daily existence and the essential tool for coping with mortality. For Meursault, hope is the ultimate act of self-deception. Once Meursault is sentenced to death, the legal system and the chaplain immediately focus on instilling hope. His lawyer discusses the certainty of an appeal. The chaplain discusses the certainty of the afterlife. Both are attempting to distract Meursault from the fixed, final reality of his death. Meursault rejects this hope entirely. He recognizes that clinging to the chance of a successful appeal or the promise of salvation only introduces torment and fear. He realizes that false hope binds one to a future that is not guaranteed and distracts one from the only time that is real, the present. He reflects on how all condemned men, even those with no chance, cling to the belief that they will somehow escape. This human weakness is, to Meursault, a refusal to accept the logic of the absurd. Since the universe is indifferent and fate is fixed, the most honest response is to embrace the certainty of annihilation and find liberation in it. By rejecting hope, Meursault achieves a profound psychological peace. He is no longer tormented by the what-ifs. He is free to focus entirely on the value of the minutes remaining. He is able to look at the night sky and feel the tender indifference of the world, because he has shed the desire for the world to conform to his wishes for meaning or survival. The refusal of hope is an act of courageous lucidity. It is a statement that Meursault will live his final moments authentically, without the need for the comforting illusion of tomorrow. He proves that the knowledge of death does not necessarily lead to despair, but can lead to a fierce, liberated joy in the now. During the trial, the prosecutor employs a powerful rhetorical strategy by juxtaposing Meursault with the case of the parricide, a man being tried separately for the murder of his own father. The prosecutor draws a chilling, morally equivalent link between the two crimes. The prosecutor argues that Meursault is, in a spiritual sense, a parricide himself. He claims, "I accuse this man of having killed his mother in his heart." The prosecutor is asserting that Meursault's profound indifference and his refusal to grieve represent a moral and spiritual breakdown that is just as devastating to the social order as the physical act of patricide. The juxtaposition is designed to achieve two goals. First, it simplifies the complex, irrational nature of Meursault's crime. By linking it to a crime of passion, the parricide, the prosecutor forces Meursault's meaningless act back into the conventional framework of human evil. It makes the crime understandable, and therefore punishable according to established moral laws. Second, it elevates the threat Meursault poses. By arguing that Meursault and the parricide are both monsters who must be eliminated, the prosecutor is making a case for social defense. Meursault's failure is not just personal, it is a contagion that threatens the shared moral illusion necessary for society to function. Meursault, listening to this elaborate legal fiction, feels a sense of detached camaraderie with the parricide. He recognizes that both of them are being condemned by the same societal mechanism, one that is more interested in constructing a coherent narrative of evil than in understanding the true facts of the case. The prosecutor's ultimate demand is that Meursault be judged by a single, severe moral standard. He insists that Meursault's indifference is not merely an absence of feeling, but a deliberate, aggressive rejection of the human condition. The court is sentencing Meursault not for the one murder he committed, but for all the murders he did not commit in his heart, for his failure to value life enough to mourn death. This forced moral equivalence is the final, ultimate proof that Meursault is judged not by justice but by the moral necessity of the human collective. Meursault's entire existence is structured around the urgency of the physical body and its immediate needs, in stark contrast to the abstract spiritual or moral needs that dominate the lives of those around him. This emphasis on the body defines his perception of pleasure, pain, and death. In the first part of the novel, his pleasures are purely sensual: the cool water of the sea, the warmth of Marie's body, the taste of a cigarette, and the satisfaction of a simple meal. These needs are immediate and must be addressed in the present moment. He prioritizes physical comfort over emotional duty. This is why his immediate physical fatigue after the funeral is more important to him than the ritual of mourning. His pain is physical: the headache, the immense glare of the sun, and the exhaustion of the vigil. He reacts violently to the sun's glare on the beach because it causes him genuine and agonizing physical pain. The murder is thus triggered by a physiological reflex rather than a psychological motive. When he is imprisoned, the loss of physical freedom is what he initially mourns most deeply. He misses the sea and women. The freedom he loses is not an abstract concept like liberty, but the concrete ability to use his body to find sensual pleasure. In his final moments, his fear is not of eternal damnation, but of the physical destruction of his body by the guillotine. He dwells on the mechanical efficiency of the blade and the sudden, violent end of his physical being. The ultimate philosophical statement of Meursault's life is that the body is the only reality. If the universe is indifferent and there is no God or afterlife, then all meaning must reside in the brief, tangible reality of the physical self. By focusing entirely on the body, Meursault achieves a kind of authenticity that the others lack. He does not live a lie. He accepts the natural limits of his physical existence, and he finds a simple, pure value in the sensory moments life offers. The physical reality of his execution is therefore the final, necessary condition of his life, a definitive proof that the body, which gave him all his joy, is also the source of his absolute end. The extended conflict between Meursault and the chaplain in the final sections of the novel represents the ultimate philosophical confrontation between two opposing systems of belief regarding death and meaning. The chaplain comes offering absolution, forgiveness, and the promise of salvation, which is the ultimate denial of the absurd. The chaplain's faith requires a universe that is meaningful, just, and responsive to human moral needs. For him, Meursault's crime is a sin against God and man, a transgression that can only be resolved through repentance and a leap of faith into the transcendental. He believes in the infinite value of the soul and the certainty of an afterlife. He is genuinely disturbed by Meursault's lack of distress, as it suggests the terrifying possibility that his own beliefs are merely comforting illusions. Meursault, conversely, exists in a materialist, finite universe defined by the immediate. He sees the chaplain's offerings not as gifts of mercy, but as final, desperate attempts to contaminate his hard-won lucidity. Meursault's refusal to repent is not an act of arrogance, it is an act of intellectual honesty. He cannot confess to a sin against a God he does not believe in, nor can he seek solace in an eternity that holds no meaning for him. The chaplain insists, "Do you want my life to be meaningless?" He realizes that Meursault's complete acceptance of the absurd invalidates the entire purpose of his own ordered, devotional life. If Meursault is right, if the universe is indifferent, then the chaplain's lifelong devotion to a higher power is nothing but a self-imposed prison of illusion. The final, violent outburst by Meursault is his furious insistence on his right to live and die by his truth. He is rejecting the social and spiritual pressure to submit to a collective lie. He shouts that nothing the chaplain does or says matters, because they are both rushing toward the same singular final annihilation. This rebellion against absolution is Meursault's final definitive philosophical statement. He chooses to die in the terrifying yet liberating certainty of nothingness. The inevitability of the guillotine serves as the ultimate symbol of the absurd and the final arbiter of Meursault's fate. It represents the brutal, mechanical efficiency of the social machine and the cold, unanswerable certainty of death. Meursault's fixation on the guillotine is intensely physical. He is not concerned with the spiritual consequences, but with the mechanics of the event, the sudden, irreparable destruction of his body. He describes the execution as the final absolute boundary of his existence. He notes the historical fact that the guillotine was considered a progressive, civilized form of punishment because it was quick and efficient, but he recognizes its true terrifying nature as a machine of pure finality. The guillotine also symbolizes the cold logic of the social contract. The machine does not act out of passion, revenge, or religious conviction. It acts out of necessity and routine. The court has used logical language and moral arguments to condemn him, and the state uses a perfectly calibrated machine to execute the sentence. The entire process is a seamless display of order imposed upon the human chaos. The historical timing of the execution at dawn is significant. The act is conducted away from the scorching, passionate glare of the midday sun, the very force that drove his crime. The state chooses a time of cool, detached clarity, emphasizing that the execution is a calculated, dispassionate act of social cleansing. In his final moments, Meursault recognizes that this execution is the ultimate proof of the absurd. His random, sun-driven act of killing is met with a fixed, inevitable, and definitive mechanical response. The world's indifference is matched by the machine's indifference. Meursault's final, serene acceptance of the guillotine is his acceptance of this truth. He realizes that the execution, though brutal, is the necessary endpoint of a life lived without illusion. By embracing the absolute finality of the blade, he escapes the human trap of eternal hope and achieves a complete final peace with the cosmos. The narrative structure of The Stranger is itself a profound philosophical statement. The novel is divided into two distinct parts, which function like a mirror reflecting Meursault's existence in two fundamentally different lights. Part 1 is the life of action and sensation. It is narrated in the first person, in a detached, immediate, and purely descriptive style. Meursault acts without motive, driven only by the pressing reality of his body and the climate. He records events as they happen, refusing to link them with emotional or moral causality. This part culminates in the random, meaningless act of murder. This half establishes Meursault's authenticity and his natural innate acceptance of the absurd condition. He lives without illusion. Part 2 is the life of reflection and judgment. This part takes place entirely after the murder and focuses on society's reaction to Meursault's existence. The style shifts from immediate narration to a more reflective, analytical tone, though still told from Meursault's perspective. He is no longer the active agent. He is the passive object of scrutiny. The trial becomes the central mechanism through which society attempts to invent meaning for his actions. The philosophical movement between the two parts is crucial. In Part 1, Meursault is the stranger to himself, living without self-awareness or philosophical articulation. He is merely an innocent of the earth. In Part 2, through the brutal process of imprisonment and trial, he is forced to achieve consciousness, lucidity. He begins to understand why he is a stranger to society, because he refuses to lie about the human condition. The division of the novel demonstrates that the absurd is not just a philosophical concept but a lived experience followed by a conscious recognition. Meursault only truly becomes the absurd hero when he understands the consequences of his authenticity. His simple sensory life in Part 1 is judged and condemned by the sophisticated, moralizing logic of the trial in Part 2. The second half of the book, in effect, provides the philosophical context and condemnation for the authentic life lived in the first half. The core philosophical tension of The Stranger is driven by the silence of the universe, a metaphor for the cosmos's absolute lack of response to human questions of meaning. This silence is the constant backdrop against which Meursault's life unfolds. The universe's indifference is presented primarily through the brute force of nature, the sun, the sea, the heat. These forces operate without malice or care, simply obeying their own physical laws. When the sun drives Meursault to murder, it is not an act of divine punishment or cosmic intervention. It is a random physical event. This metaphysical stance is what necessitates the human invention of meaning. Because the universe will not provide the answers, institutions like religion, law, and social morality must step in to create them. The magistrate, the prosecutor, and the chaplain are all desperately trying to break the silence by forcing Meursault to acknowledge a higher, external authority. The chaplain's final plea is an attempt to force Meursault to believe that beyond the silence there is a responsive, loving God. Meursault's final rage is his rebellion against this demand. He chooses to affirm the integrity of the silence. In the final moments of the novel, Meursault achieves a state of peace by reconciling himself with this silence. He is no longer fighting it or trying to escape it. When he looks at the night sky, he feels the tender indifference of the world. The silence is no longer terrifying, it is liberating. Since the universe is indifferent, then all of his small choices, his love for Marie, his casual murder, his refusal to weep, are equally valid and equally meaningless. This equality of meaninglessness gives his life a profound, fierce freedom. He is freed from the burden of seeking cosmic validation. The universe's silence is the ultimate truth of the absurd. It is the terrifying yet beautiful freedom of knowing that human existence is a temporary conscious act played out against a backdrop that simply does not care. One of the striking features of Meursault's trial is the constant demand by the court, the prosecutor, and even his own lawyer for a recognizable, pitiable human emotion. Society is demanding that he feel pity for his mother, pity for his victim, and self-pity for his circumstances. Meursault's inability to express or feel this pity is what ultimately seals his fate. Pity in the social sense is a mechanism that allows the community to reincorporate a transgressor by acknowledging their shared human frailty and sorrow. It requires the expression of suffering and the desire for forgiveness. Meursault, however, remains emotionally inaccessible to this necessary exchange. When his lawyer attempts to defend him by using the word "we," implying a universal human experience of tragedy, Meursault recoils. He feels completely alienated from the lawyer's sentimental narrative, recognizing that the lawyer is attempting to fit him into a mold of accepted human suffering, which he rejects. He has no desire to be pitied because he does not pity himself. Meursault views his impending execution not as a tragedy worthy of tears, but as a simple physical fact of existence. He accepts the death sentence with a profound resignation, which the court interprets as arrogant coldness. The most intense expression of this rejection of pity comes in his final moments. His last wish is not for forgiveness or mercy, but for the crowd to greet him with cries of hate. This hate is a more honest, more direct human emotion than pity. Pity would soften the blow of the absurd, suggesting that his suffering had some kind of moral weight. Hate, however, affirms his individuality, his difference, and his rebellion. By demanding hate, Meursault demands that society acknowledge him authentically, not as a pitiful victim, but as a conscious rebel against the established order. Pity would diminish his final triumph, suggesting he needed comforting illusions. Hate affirms his lucidity and his isolated, heroic stand against the moralizing demands of the community. The prosecutor in the trial is not simply a legal adversary, he is the true artist of the lie in the novel, representing the supreme human ability to construct a coherent, meaningful narrative where none exists. His performance provides a crucial counterpoint to Meursault's authenticity. The prosecutor's genius lies in his complete mastery of rhetoric and emotional causality. He takes Meursault's fragmented, indifferent life, a series of random sensual moments, and weaves it into a perfect logical tapestry of premeditated evil. His material is thin and circumstantial. A man who failed to cry at a funeral, who went swimming with a woman the next day, and who was friends with a neighborhood pimp. Individually, these are insignificant details. The prosecutor, however, connects them with a single, powerful moral judgment, that Meursault is a man without a soul, and that his indifference at the funeral was the first sign of the spiritual decay that inevitably led to the physical murder. The prosecutor is an agent of social necessity. He knows that the truth of the murder, it was because of the sun, is metaphysically dangerous because it destroys the premise of human accountability. Therefore, he must fabricate a motive rooted in moral depravity. He uses powerful, evocative language, comparing Meursault to the parricide, thereby elevating the trial from a simple criminal case to a defense of the entire moral universe. Meursault, observing this performance, feels a strange sense of detached admiration. He recognizes the sheer skill required to create such a compelling, coherent lie. The prosecutor is doing what the absurd man refuses to do. He is inventing meaning to make the chaos of life manageable. This comparison reveals the central philosophical conflict. The prosecutor's artistic lie, necessary for society, versus Meursault's brutal hollow truth, necessary for authenticity. Meursault's death is the price of his commitment to the latter. The prosecutor's narrative, though untrue to Meursault's experience, is the narrative that society chooses to live by, confirming that social justice is ultimately an aesthetic performance of moral order. Meursault's existence, particularly during the trial, is characterized by a profound and tragic irony. His greatest virtue, his absolute sincere honesty, is simultaneously the sole cause of his condemnation. His truth is incommunicable to the society that judges him. The universe Meursault inhabits is one where causation is physical and arbitrary. The murder of the Arab was an act of pure, irrational response to the brutal, indifferent heat and the blinding sunlight. When he states this truth to the magistrate in the court, he is speaking with a literal fidelity that few humans ever achieve. However, the human world is built on the psychological causation. For society to function, every action must be rooted in a comprehensible human motive: love, hatred, greed, or revenge. The court requires a reason that fits the human story, not the cosmic one. The irony is that if Meursault had simply lied, if he had fabricated a conventional motive such as "I feared for my life" or "I was avenging my friend Raymond," he would likely have received a much lighter sentence, as his crime would have been rendered comprehensible within the social contract. He would have been seen as a tragic, flawed but understandable human being. But Meursault cannot lie. His conscience is not moral but sensory and linguistic. He feels compelled to report the facts as they are experienced by his body. His refusal to invent a motive is a passive act of rebellion against the system's demand for meaning. By being relentlessly honest, he forces the court to deal not with a criminal, but with a metaphysical anarchist, a man who rejects the human language of passion and morality. His truth reveals the absurdity at the core of social justice. To save itself from this terrifying truth, society must invent a grand lie that he is a moral monster and execute him. His death is the price paid for his linguistic purity and his refusal to commit philosophical or rhetorical deception. The title of the novel, The Stranger, refers most obviously to Meursault's position as an outsider to the conventional moral norms of society. However, a deeper reading reveals that Meursault is also a stranger to himself in the first half of the book, only achieving self-recognition through the crucible of his fate. In the early chapters, Meursault is largely a passive recipient of sensation. He allows events to happen to him. His mother dies, he begins an affair with Marie, he helps Raymond. Without self-reflection or philosophical inquiry, he has no psychological depth or internal ambition. He is simply a consciousness registering the external world. He lives without fully understanding the implications or the uniqueness of his own indifferent state. The murder itself is a chaotic, non-reflective act. It is a moment of pure, irrational physical determinism where his hand and the sun act, not his will. He commits the crime and moves on, treating it as another inconvenience to be overcome. The process of imprisonment and trial forces a radical change. Stripped of external distractions, the sea, the sun, Marie, Meursault is forced to confront his own consciousness. The relentless scrutiny of the court, which attempts to build a coherent narrative of his life, compels him to reflect on his past and understand why he acted the way he did. He begins to achieve lucidity. He realizes that his indifference, his lack of grief, and his honesty are not merely quirks, but a philosophical stance. He comes to understand the true nature of his rejection of hope, his valuing of the present, and his acceptance of the absurd. By the time he confronts the chaplain, Meursault is no longer merely reacting. He is consciously rebelling. He is no longer a stranger to his own philosophy. The execution is no longer an arbitrary event, but the conscious final act of his life. The novel's movement is thus an intellectual journey from unconscious authenticity, the stranger to the self, to conscious rebellion, the absurd hero. Meursault's exile from society ultimately leads to his definitive self-possession. The tragedy is that he only fully understands his unique, liberated life in the moment it is about to be terminated. The character of Marie Cardenas serves a specific function in Meursault's life, and in the philosophical framework of The Stranger. She represents the immediate physical and transient possibility of human connection that is nonetheless subject to the limitations of the absurd. Meursault's connection with Marie is purely sensory and present-focused. He desires her company, finds her physically attractive, and enjoys the simple pleasure of their shared activities, swimming, laughing, and physical intimacy. Their relationship is initiated and sustained by the immediacy of their physical lives on the beach and in his apartment. The crucial point of their relationship is the lack of conventional emotion. When Marie asks him about love, Meursault honestly states that he does not think he loves her, but that he would marry her if she wished. He sees marriage not as a profound commitment of souls, but as a simple functional arrangement that holds no more or less intrinsic meaning than any other choice. Marie, who initially accepts his peculiarity, still operates within the standard social framework. She is momentarily sad when he cannot profess romantic love, and she is later horrified when the prosecution uses their relationship's timing the day after his mother's death to prove his moral depravity. When she visits him in prison, their conversation is strained and superficial. The physical barrier of the prison bars, combined with the temporal barrier, Meursault living in the fixed time of waiting, makes genuine connection impossible. Marie is desperately clinging to the hope of the future, discussing an appeal and a life together. Meursault, having rejected hope and accepted the absurd, can no longer truly connect with her belief in a meaningful future. Marie ultimately highlights the isolation of the absurd man. While Meursault can experience genuine physical pleasure and comfort from human contact, he cannot achieve the deep, shared, transcendent meaning that society demands of a relationship. She is a reminder that even the most immediate sensual joy is finite and subject to the cold indifference of the cosmos. She represents the limits of the human attempt to transcend the absurd through love. Meursault's imprisonment transforms his relationship with time and memory, forcing him to internalize his existence and achieve a profound new understanding of the absurd condition. Initially, the loss of his freedom is painful because it means the loss of sensory reality, the sun, the sea, the feels of Marie. However, he quickly adapts to the monotonous prison routine, which teaches him a critical lesson. Time is not the enemy when one has no hope of a meaningful future. He ceases to distinguish between one day and the next, accepting the blurring of time. To fill this void, Meursault turns inward to memory. He does not engage in moral reflection or existential despair. Instead, he focuses on the minute, concrete and sensory details of his old apartment. He spends hours mentally reconstructing the exact location of his furniture, the colour of his walls, and the position of the shadow at different times of the day. This meticulous sensory cataloguing is his way of affirming the reality and value of his past life. By focusing on the tangible, he demonstrates that his previous existence was real and unique, regardless of the fact that it lacked conventional meaning. This exercise proves to him that one can find contentment and a form of freedom even within the confines of absolute imprisonment. The prison acts as a laboratory for the absurd man. It strips away all external illusions, ambition, social pretense, the delusion of perpetual freedom, leaving only the immediate conscious self. Meursault realizes that he has always lived this way, prioritizing the present over the future, and now he is simply forced to live this truth completely. His waiting period ends not with fear, but with lucidity. He understands that even in the face of the guillotine, the time he has lived, the hours he spent on the beach, and the simple joy he found in the sun are the only things that possess genuine, irreducible value. He is free because he has realized that the universe is indifferent to his fate, and his only true possession is the time he is conscious of. Although Meursault is defined by his indifference and his isolation, the narrative includes small, poignant moments where he registers a genuine, if passive, sympathy for others. One such moment occurs during his imprisonment, when he reflects on his neighbour, the old man Salamano, and his mangy dog. Meursault recalls the day the dog disappeared. Salamano, usually characterized by mutual hatred and abuse toward the dog, was suddenly thrown into a state of profound distress. He sought advice from Meursault, desperately asking where the dog could have gone. The intense grief the old man displayed for the creature he had so consistently cursed was deeply unsettling. Meursault reflects on the sound of Salamano weeping in his room that night. He could hear the low, wrenching sound of his neighbour's sorrow. This is one of the few instances where Meursault's attention is entirely focused on another person's emotional state, rather than his own sensory experience. The moment is significant because it reveals that Salamano's seemingly hateful routine with his dog was, in fact, a deeply rooted ritual of existence. The misery and the abuse provided a fixed point, a shared history that anchored the old man's lonely life. When that anchor was removed, the man was left adrift in the chaos of the absurd. Meursault feels pity for Salamano, not in a sentimental sense, but in a recognition of their shared human frailty and loneliness. He realizes that despite their vastly different emotional lives, they both cling to the small, tangible realities that define their existence. Salamano clung to his miserable dog, Meursault clung to the sea and the sun. This shared moment of silent understanding is a subtle counterpoint to Meursault's later rejection of pity from the court. Meursault can feel a quiet, authentic sympathy for the private, unperformed misery of his neighbour, but he refuses to participate in the public, performative pity demanded by the social machine. The pity he feels is a genuine recognition of the absurd condition that they both share, a condition where even hatred can create a bond. The ultimate philosophical statement of the stranger is reached in Meursault's cell following his confrontation with the chaplain. In this moment of intense lucidity, Meursault fully reconciles his small, finite life with the vast, indifferent cosmos. He is no longer tormented by the certainty of death, nor is he tempted by the comfort of religious faith. Having purged himself of all illusion through his furious rejection of the chaplain, he achieves a state of profound peace and clarity. He looks out at the night sky through his cell window and feels the presence of the stars. The stars are the perfect embodiment of the universe's indifference. They are immense, eternal, and operate according to the laws that have no regard for human happiness, sadness, or moral codes. Meursault realizes that this indifference, which had terrified the chaplain, is in fact tender. The universe's lack of care is precisely what frees him, since nothing matters on a cosmic scale. Then his own life, his moments of simple joy, his honesty, his crime, and his death are all rendered equally valuable in their profound meaninglessness. He embraces the knowledge that he is not unique. His life is just a fleeting physical phenomenon, a conscious flicker against an eternal darkness. This realization floods him with a deep, existential joy. He finally accepts the meaning of his mother's life, seeing that she too, in her final days, must have found this same simple acceptance of the world's inevitable rhythm. He realizes that his life and his mother's life share a single unified truth. The certainty of death makes every moment lived precious and real. Meursault's final wish, to be greeted by cries of hate, is the final affirmation of his absurd heroism. He wants his unique rebellion against meaning to be recognized by the human world he is leaving. Their hate is proof that he lived authentically, without conforming to their necessary lies. He achieves a final integrated state of consciousness, freedom and rebellion, finding peace in the definitive end of his own physical time. The title of the novel, The Stranger, refers most obviously to Meursault's position as an outsider to the conventional moral norms of society. However, a deeper reading reveals that Meursault is also a stranger to himself in the first half of the book, only achieving self-recognition through the crucible of his fate. In the early chapters, Meursault is largely a passive recipient of sensation. He allows events to happen to him. His mother dies, he begins an affair with Marie, he helps Raymond, without self-reflection or philosophical inquiry. He has no psychological depth or internal ambition. He is simply a consciousness registering the external world. He lives without fully understanding the implications or the uniqueness of his own indifferent state. The murder itself is a chaotic, non-reflective act. It is a moment of pure, irrational physical determinism where his hand and the sun act, not his will. He commits the crime and moves on, treating it as another inconvenience to be overcome. The process of imprisonment and trial forces a radical change. Stripped of external distractions, the sea, the sun, Marie, Meursault is forced to confront his own consciousness. The relentless scrutiny of the court, which attempts to build a coherent narrative of his life, compels him to reflect on his past and understand why he acted the way he did. He begins to achieve lucidity. He realizes that his indifference, his lack of grief, and his honesty are not merely quirks, but a philosophical stance. He comes to understand the true nature of his rejection of hope, his valuing of the present, and his acceptance of the absurd. By the time he confronts the chaplain, Meursault is no longer merely reacting. He is consciously rebelling. He is no longer a stranger to his own philosophy. The execution is no longer an arbitrary event, but the conscious final act of his life. The novel's movement is thus an intellectual journey from unconscious authenticity, the stranger to the self, to conscious rebellion, the absurd hero. Meursault's exile from society ultimately leads to his definitive self-possession. The tragedy is that he only fully understands his unique, liberated life in the moment it is about to be terminated. Meursault's experience in prison is crucial for his philosophical awakening, as confinement forces him to confront the nature of space and restriction in the context of the absurd. Initially, the loss of his freedom, the inability to walk on the beach or feel the sun, is a profound physical deprivation. However, he quickly adapts to the physical constraints of his cell, realizing that space is relative when one has already accepted the ultimate constriction of death. He learns that the walls of the cell, which initially felt oppressive, become a fixed, predictable reality. This fixed physical space contrasts with the chaotic, open, and demanding space of the outside world, which required him to constantly engage in social pretense and emotional performance. The cell offers him a quiet, defined space for his internal sensory exercises. He spends countless hours focusing on the details of the cell and, more importantly, reconstructing the space of his old apartment through memory. By meticulously recalling the arrangement of his furniture and the paths of light and shadow in his previous home, he proves to himself that his existence was concrete and real. He replaces physical exploration with internal reconstruction. The cell also changes his perception of the horizon. He is cut off from the vast physical horizon of the sea, which he loved, but he discovers a new, inner horizon, the limit of his own consciousness and will. The physical boundary of the wall forces him to confront the metaphysical boundary of his own fate. Meursault realizes that true freedom is not the absence of physical walls, but the absence of psychological walls, the walls of hope, illusion, and societal expectation. He becomes free in his confinement by consciously accepting his physical limits and refusing to limit his mind with false expectations. The prison cell becomes the ultimate stage for his triumph over the absurd, transforming a space of physical oppression into a space of philosophical liberation. Meursault's imprisonment transforms his relationship with time and memory, forcing him to internalize his existence and achieve a profound new understanding of the absurd condition. Initially, the loss of his freedom is painful because it means the loss of sensory reality, the sun, the sea, the feel of Marie. However, he quickly adapts to the monotonous prison routine, which teaches him a critical lesson. Time is not the enemy when one has no hope of a meaningful future. He ceases to distinguish between one day and the next, accepting the blurring of time. To fill this void, Meursault turns inward to memory. He does not engage in moral reflection or existential despair. Instead, he focuses on the minute, concrete, and sensory details of his old apartment. He spends hours mentally reconstructing the exact location of his furniture, the colour of his walls, and the position of the shadow at different times of the day. This meticulous sensory cataloguing is his way of affirming the reality and value of his past life. By focusing on the tangible, he demonstrates that his previous existence was real and unique, regardless of the fact that it lacked conventional meaning. This exercise proves to him that one can find contentment and a form of freedom even within the confines of absolute imprisonment. The prison acts as a laboratory for the absurd man. It strips away all external illusions, ambition, social pretense, the delusion of perpetual freedom, leaving only the immediate conscious self. Meursault realizes that he has always lived this way, prioritizing the present over the future, and now he is simply forced to live this truth completely. His waiting period ends not with fear but with lucidity. He understands that even in the face of the guillotine, the time he has lived, the hours he spent on the beach, and the simple joy he found in the sun are the only things that possess genuine, irreducible value. He is free because he has realized that the universe is indifferent to his fate, and his only true possession is the time he is conscious of. While Albert Camus built The Stranger upon his own philosophy of the absurd, the novel also exists within a rich literary tradition, particularly engaging with the Russian masters who explored the limits of human morality and judicial process. The most notable connection is with Fyodor Dostoevsky. Camus admired Dostoevsky's work, particularly The Myth of Sisyphus, and acknowledged his influence on themes of freedom, guilt, and the irrational nature of crime. In The Stranger, the trial's emphasis on Meursault's spiritual crime rather than the physical murder echoes Dostoevsky's exploration of sin and existential crisis. Specifically, the absurdity of the trial process in The Stranger resonates with Dostoevsky's later works, such as The Trial, where the protagonist is condemned by a baffling non-rational bureaucracy. Camus' use of double causality, where Meursault is condemned for indifference at the funeral, which is then retroactively used to justify the murder, reflects the twisted logic found in Dostoevsky's courts. The intense final confrontation with the chaplain also serves as a secular echo of Dostoevsky's religious and philosophical struggles. Dostoevsky's characters are constantly tormented by the existence or non-existence of God, and their crimes are often attempts to test the boundaries of a divine moral order. Meursault, however, provides a distinctly modern and absurdist answer. He is not tormented by Dostoevsky's spiritual anguish. He is merely sincere. He does not test God, he simply reports the fact that God does not exist for him. By drawing upon the atmosphere of moral crisis found in Dostoevsky, Camus heightens the drama of Meursault's trial. But where Dostoevsky's characters seek redemption through suffering and faith, Meursault seeks liberation through lucidity and rebellion. He refuses the path of repentance, turning the Dostoevskian quest for salvation into a modern, existential triumph over religious comfort. Meursault is the absurd man providing the definitive counter-argument to the passionate, faith-driven morality of the 19th century. Meursault's relationship with his mother, even in her death, is stripped of all conventional sentimentality and serves as an early indication of his absurdist perspective. He harbours no deep dramatic grief when she dies. He simply accepts the event as a fact. This lack of visible emotion is not due to a profound cruelty, but to a fundamental inability to feel or perform emotional ritual where he perceives no intrinsic meaning. He cannot invent the tears society demands. Crucially, Meursault recognises that his mother, in her later years, had herself begun to live a life closer to the absurd condition. He acknowledges that she was often lonely and had found a peculiar kind of freedom in the routine and isolation of the old person's home. She had found a new meaning in the quiet ritual of her days, a life stripped of the obligations and passions of youth. In his final moments, Meursault reflects on the possibility that his mother too had embraced the tender indifference of the world. He imagines that she, having reached the end of her life, must have found a kind of solace in accepting the certainty of her fate. He muses that she may even have taken a lover in the home, the old man Thomas Perez, an act that shows a final, desperate yet authentic embrace of life and passions in the face of annihilation. This parallel between mother and son is vital. Meursault's final philosophical state, his liberation and peace achieved by facing death without illusion, is seen by him as the ultimate logical continuation of his mother's late life acceptance. He sees her life as a quiet example of the absurd man, finding value in the immediate final act of living, even if that living is mundane and confined. The sentimentality surrounding the mother's death is entirely an invention of the court. They impose the standard of filial love and grief to condemn him. Meursault, however, finds a deeper, more honest connection with his mother in their shared acceptance of life's essential meaninglessness. The constant oppressive presence of the Algerian climate is the philosophical anchor for Meursault's commitment to the purity of the physical and his subsequent rejection of the abstract. The climate functions as a kind of natural sieve, filtering Meursault's experience down to its essentials. The heat, the sun, and the sea are tangible, undeniable, and immediate. They demand a response from the body before the mind can construct a moral or emotional interpretation. Meursault's pleasures are defined by the climate, the sensual relief of the cool water, the warmth of the sand, and the physical comfort of a shared bed. These are simple, honest reactions that require no philosophical justification. His pain is equally physical, the blinding glare of the sun, the pounding headache, and the fatigue of the journey. The physical agony caused by the sun on the beach is the irrefutable cause of the murder, as he honestly reports. By allowing himself to be governed entirely by these sensory realities, Meursault demonstrates a radical form of authenticity. He refuses to prioritize invented human concepts, like social duty, moral obligation, or abstract ambition, over the immediate truths dictated by his body and the environment. This commitment to the sensory life is Camus's method for isolating the absurd man. In a universe that offers no ultimate separated meaning, the only true values are the fleeting, finite moments of conscious existence. These moments are best apprehended through the senses. The contrast with the chaplain, who attempts to elevate Meursault's consciousness to the abstract levels of God, sin, and eternity, is total. Meursault remains, until the end, a creature of the earth, loyal to the sun that gave him pleasure and caused his ruin. His final peace is achieved not through transcendence, but through the ultimate reconciliation with his own physicality and the physical reality of the indifferent world that created him. Meursault's existence is fundamentally characterized by a linguistic barrier that separates him from the society that judges him. His truth is incommunicable because he uses language solely to report physical facts, while society uses language to construct moral meaning and causality. This division stems from the nature of the absurd. Since the universe is silent and indifferent, human beings must invent a system of words, concepts, and emotional narratives to make life bearable. These invented narratives, like grief, love, sin, and repentance, form the language of the social contract. Meursault refuses to speak this language. He is a man of pure denotation. He means exactly what he says and nothing more. When he says he did not cry because he was too tired, he means precisely that. His body was fatigued. Society hears he is a cold-hearted monster incapable of love. When he says he killed because of the sun, he means the event was a random physical reaction to pain. Society hears he is mocking the court with an insane non-human motive. The court and the prosecutor, in turn, are masters of connotation and rhetoric. They take Meursault's simple, honest facts and twist them to imply moral corruption. The prosecutor creates a seamless, fictional narrative of evil where Meursault's apathy is proof of premeditation. Meursault's tragic realization is that the truth itself is a dangerous weapon. His honesty, which should be a virtue, becomes the most convincing evidence of his guilt because it exposes the fragility of the social language. To speak the literal truth in a world that relies on comforting illusions is to become an exile, a stranger whose communication challenges the very foundation of meaning. His ultimate act of lucidity is to recognize that he cannot win this language game. He retreats into a frustrated silence during the trial, and later, in his final confrontation with the chaplain, he resorts to shouting and physical violence, a non-verbal expression of his pure, authentic truth. The concept of habit and routine plays a subtle but essential role in The Stranger, demonstrating how ordinary people attempt to cope with the underlying meaninglessness of the absurd. For most people, routines provide a structure, a sense of predictability, and a temporary illusion of control over a chaotic universe. The other characters are defined by their reliance on this structure. Salamano maintains his misery through the fixed routine of verbally abusing his dog. The men at the office maintain the routine of ambition and career climbing. The community maintains the routine of mourning and social piety. When these routines are broken, chaos rushes in. Salamano is destroyed when his dog, the anchor of his routine, disappears. The society is threatened when Meursault breaks the funeral ritual. Meursault, however, uses habit differently. In the first part, his life is routine, work, lunch, Marie, the cinema, but he harbours no illusion that the routine holds any intrinsic meaning. He's simply floating along, accepting the path of least resistance. In prison, habit becomes his conscious survival tool. The absolute predictability of the prison cell and the regulated schedule, the guards, the meals, the light, is a constant, manageable reality. Instead of being oppressed by the routine, Meursault embraces it. He creates his own internal habit, the sensory reconstruction of his apartment. This mental exercise is a ritual he performs to affirm the value of his past, conscious life. By turning the mundane into a meditative practice, he transforms the oppressive routine of the cell into a space of lucid self-affirmation. Meursault demonstrates that one can live within the confines of routine, without falling into the self-deception that the routine equals purpose. The absurd man can use habit as a framework for living authentically in the present, while rejecting the social habit of inventing meaning for the future. He achieves freedom not by escaping the routine, but by consciously choosing his internal engagement with it. The death penalty, specifically execution by the guillotine, serves as a powerful symbol in The Stranger, representing society's ultimate, mechanical act of imposing order and certainty upon the chaos of human existence. Camus, who vehemently opposed capital punishment, uses Meursault's execution to critique the underlying hypocrisy of social justice. The court, operating under the guise of restoring moral balance, requires the death penalty for two reasons. First, to create a final, fixed consequence for the chaos introduced by Meursault's crime. Meursault's murder was random, motiveless, and absurd. The execution is the state's attempt to make the entire sequence of events seem coherent and meaningful. The logic is, an act of such moral depravity must lead to an act of absolute retribution. Second, to protect the fragility of the social contract. Meursault's true crime was his philosophical indifference, his refusal to weep for his mother, or believe in God. This indifference exposed the absurd foundation of human existence. Society cannot tolerate this truth, as it would lead to widespread anarchy and moral collapse. Therefore, Meursault must be eliminated to symbolically affirm the validity of their shared illusions. Meursault's own reflection on the guillotine is intensely physical. He focuses on its mechanical efficiency, recognizing that the machine is as indifferent to his fate as the sun was to his crime. The state executes him not out of passion, but out of cold administrative necessity. He considers the historical arguments for the guillotine, that it is quick and painless, but rejects them as sentimental lies designed to make the act palatable. The execution is the final definitive proof of the absurdity of the social order. It uses a meticulous reasoned process, the trial, to impose a definitive end on a life that insisted on remaining open to all possibilities. Meursault's death is not justice, it is an act of social self-preservation. Meursault's philosophy is fundamentally a rejection of utopian thinking, the belief in a perfect, meaningful, or eternally better future, whether in a social, political, or religious sense. The absurd hero must reject all such claims to future perfection. His indifference to the promotion and his casual acceptance of marriage are early signs of this rejection. He sees the future as merely an extension of the meaningless present, arguing that people never change their lives. He refuses to sacrifice the immediate reality of his present moment for an uncertain, abstract future reward. In his final hours, this rejection becomes explicit. The chaplain offers him the ultimate utopia, eternal life in heaven, a place of perfect order and meaning. Meursault's furious rejection of this promise is his defining philosophical moment. He refuses to commit philosophical suicide by replacing his clear-eyed view of the indifferent world with a comforting lie about an everlasting reward. Meursault's focus remains entirely on the here and now, the physical reality of his life. He finds a simple, profound joy in the sensory memories of the past, the smells, the tastes, the feel of the air. These fleeting, finite moments are the only things that possess genuine, irreducible value, precisely because they are constrained by the certainty of death. The message is clear. The only way to live authentically in an absurd universe is to embrace the present. To acknowledge that there is no inherent meaning in the future is to free oneself from the torment of false hope and the burden of societal ambition. Meursault dies affirming the value of his own finite physical life. He is not a nihilist who believes in destruction, but an absurd man who believes in the supreme yet momentary value of consciousness. He conquers the meaninglessness of the cosmos by living fully and consciously until his final breath. Meursault's relationship with Marie Cardona poses a central paradox regarding the capacity for love and connection within the absurdist framework. While he is universally condemned for his emotional detachment, his connection with Marie is arguably the purest form of non-sentimental affection in the novel. Meursault enjoys Marie's company. He desires her physically, and he finds a simple, immediate comfort in their shared activities. He is honest about this desire, viewing their intimacy as a genuine pleasure, a positive fact of his existence, like the pleasure of swimming or eating. The paradox arises when Marie introduces the social ritual of love and commitment. When she asks if he loves her, Meursault's honest answer, that he does not think so, is devastating to her, but it is entirely consistent with his philosophy. He does not believe in abstract concepts like eternal love or soulmates, because such concepts suggest a meaning and permanence that the universe denies. He cannot lie by claiming a transcendent connection that he does not feel. When she asks if he would marry her, he replies that it makes no difference either way, but he will agree if she wishes. This response reveals his absurd freedom. Since all choices are ultimately meaningless in the face of annihilation, any choice is acceptable. He grants Marie the freedom to choose the meaning she requires, without participating in the illusion himself. In prison, the memory of Marie is one of the few things that sustains him, yet he finds their final meeting strained because she clings to hope, the idea of their future life, a concept he has already rejected. Meursault's detachment, therefore, is not a lack of capacity for human connection, but a refusal to contaminate that connection with false sentimentality and meaningless promises. He values Marie for who she is in the immediate physical present, not for the abstract, illusory future they might share. His inability to love conventionally is his commitment to authenticity. A critical and often overlooked element of the novel is the complete anonymity and silence of the Arab whom Meursault murders. The victim is never named, never given a voice in the narrative, and his life, death, and fate are treated by the court with the same ultimate indifference Meursault is accused of exhibiting. The Arab's silence serves two profound purposes. First, it highlights Meursault's absurd lack of motive. The victim is not a character with whom Meursault has a personal conflict, hatred, or even a deep acquaintance. The man is merely a physical obstacle on a beach, a source of tension in the sun. The murder is impersonal, random, and driven by climate, emphasizing the chaotic, irrational nature of the event. If Meursault had killed a person with whom he had a strong relationship, the act would be placed within the traditional framework of human passion. By killing a virtual stranger, the act remains purely absurd. Second, the court's neglect of the Arab's identity exposes the hypocrisy of the social justice system. The court is ostensibly convened to seek justice for the victim, yet the entire trial revolves around Meursault's moral character, his failure to weep for his mother. The prosecutor is far more interested in condemning Meursault's soul than in defending the dignity of the Arab's life. The court quickly moves on to its real task, protecting the moral order. The Arab is only important as the catalyst for the state's philosophical defense. Once the murder is used to justify the condemnation of Meursault's indifference, the victim becomes irrelevant. The Arab's silence is a final tragic layer of the absurd. Just as the universe is indifferent to Meursault, so too is the human world ultimately indifferent to the victim. The novel suggests that the human need for meaning is so overwhelming that society will destroy one life, Meursault, to impose order, while simultaneously failing to honour the life that was actually lost, the Arab. The injustice is pervasive and absolute. In the final luminous moments of The Stranger, Meursault achieves his ultimate philosophical victory. His journey from unconscious indifference to lucid rebellion culminates in his complete embrace of the absurd, the immense, cold, and eternal indifference of the cosmos. He has already rejected all human-made structures of meaning, the faith offered by the chaplain, the moral causality demanded by the court, and the hope peddled by his lawyer. He has purged himself of all the illusion through the catharsis of his final rage. When he looks at the night sky, he is not seeking a god, nor is he seeking a sign of hope. He is looking at the stars, the physical evidence of a universe that operates without judgment or care for his individual fate. The stars are fixed, they are silent, and they are eternal, providing the perfect metaphor for the absoluteness that human beings desperately try to deny. His realization that the world is tenderly indifferent is the key to his freedom. The indifference is tender because it removes the pressure of needing to find meaning. If the universe does not care, then he is free to acknowledge that his own life, his pleasures, his pains, his crime, are all equally real and equally meaningless in the grand scheme. This equality is profoundly liberating. Meursault understands that his life, though brief, has been one of unique authenticity. He refused to participate in the necessary comforting lies that bind society together. He refused to invent love, invent grief, or invent purpose. His life was lived truthfully, moment by moment. His execution, therefore, is not a tragedy of meaning, but a confirmation of his truth. He is the absurd hero, fully conscious and reconciled with the fact of his own annihilation. He has used his imminent death not as a source of despair, but as the final absolute boundary that gives every preceding moment of his life its unique, irreducible value. The novel concludes with Meursault's final provocative wish, a concluding sentence that summarizes his profound rebellion. He hopes that on the day of his execution there will be a large crowd and that they will greet him with cries of hate. This is not a morbid desire for suffering. It is a final, conscious demand for connection and recognition. Meursault understands that pity would be an ultimate form of psychological annihilation. Pity would soften his crime, reducing his stand to mere human frailty and sadness, thus robbing his authentic indifference of its philosophical power. Pity would forgive the crime while ignoring the truth of his soul. Hate, however, is a direct, honest, and passion-asunder response. It means that society has understood and accepted the profound, unsettling nature of his defiance. Their hate is a confirmation that they have acknowledged him not as a pitiful victim, but as a dangerous, absurd man, one who threatens the entire foundation of their moral existence. The crowd's hate would be the final, necessary human response to the terrifying truth he embodies. By confronting the universe's indifference and choosing lucidity over comfort, Meursault has become the stranger who forces the rest of humanity to confront the limits of their own comforting illusions. His death, accompanied by the hate of the crowd, would be his final, public, and definitive act of absurd rebellion. It is the ultimate gesture of the free man, affirming the value of his own conscious life and his refusal to be potenced even by the grave. Meursault finds his final integrated peace in the face of death, proving that the only true path to freedom is the confrontation with the absurd. His story ends not in despair, but in a final, a final, quiet, liberated triumph.